wildfires, nature's natural cleansing. Over the years, it has bothered me to hear climate change and global warming alarmists compare wildfires to this purported extreme change that we're supposedly always going through. And it continues each and every year. It's always the same story. Well, we don't really know what's causing it, and we don't really know when it's going to become a disaster. They always throw that, oh, in the next, few decades, the next 30 years, the world's going to come to an end type of mentality, which is freaking crazy because, in the 1970s, the same activity, the same amount of alarmism and newspeak occurred, but what they said in the 70s was, we're going into global cooling, the next ice age is going to occur. And then decades later, look where we are now. Okay, the earth didn't freeze over. Now, if you listen to my video called Climate Change, What the Alarmists Don't Tell You, you should go check it out, because I take you on a basic ride to remind you how our Earth functions on its own and how historically it has gone through many changes on its own without our involvement. So go check that out. Now, various regions around this Earth go through many forms of wet seasons and droughts. Let's take Australia, for instance, and they always go through all kinds of wildfires. And records show, say for Australia, that give or take, there's no perfect number for anything, but every 10 or so years, they go through a period of drought and a period of wet season, and has shown consistently since, the turn of the 19th century. Again, most of this data on anything hasn't truly been collected in any way, except since the turn of the 19th century. There's a little bit of data and record before then, but no one's really focused on anything until now. And trends even show that we're kind of cooling more than often, more than the past. But that's neither here or there. When we see wildfires occur quite often in California and the rainforest and this, that, and the other. And climate alarmists will have you believe that because of us causing droughts and this, that, and the other are causing these fires, which isn't totally the case. Let's go back in time, little backstory. Historically, the indigenous peoples of many lands actively backburned forests and plains to either clear them for their own use or to rejuvenate them. You can potentially snuff out a forest by having too much dead matter on the ground. So every time they would do this, they would cleanse and clear the forests and the lands. Now, when settlers, say, made their way to America, they saw this act and thought it was crazy. You're burning up all the resources, and for them it was like, well, no, we're clearing out the land, making room for new life. So ever since that point of the settlers coming to America, the activity of burning mass amounts of land in any area that peoples live started to plummet. The activity completely plummeted. So what we end up with over the decades is a mass amount of unburnt material ground up in brush, down trees. So, because none of that land gets burnt, and when a little forest fire, brush fire starts, naturally, if it's not snuffed out, it's going to take off into all that unburnt material, thus causing a wildland fire, and it could become a major, massive fire, or not. And because so many people choose to live in regions where, well, as the population builds up in areas, well, that activity of backburning and taking care of all that unburnt material doesn't occur because you're in a densely populated area or densely populated areas nearby. So naturally, that fire's gonna take off. It's gonna destroy homes. Okay? It's like people who live in Tornado Alley in America, or flood zones, or hurricane zones. And then you always hear it on the news. It's like, oh, it's such a tragedy. It's like, no, it happens every year. We know about it, and people choose to continue to build and live in those regions. you know? I wonder if you calculate how many times people's property has been damaged by tornadoes, if they could have just invested that money into underground berm houses, right? So the tornado would just pass right over and never destroy their home. But who knows? So the point here is no matter what the earth does on its own, or if we contribute in any small form, because it's not just us, the earth, again, watch the video I mentioned, the earth does its own thing on its own and has for around 4.5 billion years. We don't manage our lands the way we used to. I know of many examples, luckily, like in my territory in northern Maine, western Maine, we can go up there and roam the forestry lands that are privately owned, but they're open to the public. And you'll see the signs, you shall kindle no fire, to prevent a wildland fire. But the reason that wildland fire would occur, again, is because of all the mass amounts of unburnt material. So it's just crazy to me to hear and alarmists, these people will never use any form of logic. They will never use facts. They will never look at something with a critical mind, and then they rely on the ignorance of people who have no critical thinking whatsoever to do all their bidding, to follow along with their scheme. And if you really look at it, most of the time, it's just a matter of control. And I'm not saying we don't need to, show ourselves up for the future, because we do. However, fear-mongering is a problem. I live on the same planet as everyone else, and my fear doesn't exist in the sense of how they create it. I don't see what they see, and it's not because I'm blind, it's because I'm viewing things objectively. Yes, we can clean up our actions on our use of resources. However, it's not just totally us. And something interesting, I'll probably touch on this whenever I make the video on energy. Of all the people who demonize the use of fossil fuels, they seem to forget that fossil fuels actually saved us. If we hadn't discovered and utilized fossil fuels and coal and whatnot, what do you think we'd be using right now? We'd be using trees. We'd be using all those resources of trees, okay? Fossil fuels have bought us time and saved us in a way. So, just food for thought for the next time you hear a bunch of BS, on mainstream media, whilst the non-experts or the non-thinking members of society read their teleprompter and, receive their fat paycheck, or, unfortunately, utilize the youth within our societies to act as a catalyst for the control that they would like to have by swaying the minds and wooing the hearts of people by emotion. And no one at no point in time in life can solve any problem whatsoever when your judgment and decision making is solely based on emotion. You're not thinking clearly. You have to use critical thinking. And that's all I've seen. I know I'm not the only one. By golly, I'm not the only one who notices these things. But instead of being emotional and blabbering on like they always do, and almost never have a solution, normally their solution again is nothing more than control, regulation. It is no solution. And what's amazing is that there are many solutions, and there have been many solutions in the past, that totally would work in the case of, say, energy. However, we live in a society where we allow dinosaurs to rule, to which snuff out the intellect of the free thinkers who have some pretty good ideas, But hey, let's go to space. Let's spend a bunch of time in thinking to go to space. Oh well, that'll be a discussion for another time. So, keep your mind open. Keep that critical thinking going. See you in the next one.